Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Rudy's 1/6 World for the next installment in our ongoing Retrospective Figure Showcase series. And today we'll be going into an older Hot Toys release from a movie that I'm not exactly sure how to describe. The figure in question, the Octopus from The Spirit. Now, the movie isn't really obscure. That's not the right way to describe it. Bad might be one way to describe it, but I'll go with interesting, bizarre, and maybe a little bit wacky. So before going into the figure, I do want to share a little bit of my collecting mindset at the time when I picked this one up. I think I was definitely lacking a bit of focus and discipline, and I was essentially picking up anything and everything. And that was especially true for any Hot Toys figures. I was in a place where basically anything they put out for pre-order was coming home with me. I think that was in large part because I was so impressed with the detail they were putting into these figures that, of course, I was absolutely loving getting figures from movies that I liked, but I was even willing to pick up figures from movies that I had no interest in at all, just because I thought they looked good. The Spirit figures definitely fell into that category. Now, Hot Toys did end up releasing 3 6-scale figures from the line, and besides the Octopus, the movie's villain, we also got Silk and Floss, his assistant, played by Scarlett Johansson, and we got the titular character himself. Now, at one point I did have all three in boxes, but ultimately I ended up selling the Silk and Floss and just staying with the Spirit and the Octopus. But they've remained in boxes until today. Now, as far as the movie's concerned, it was definitely an attempt to create a very stylized film noir type story, maybe borrowing a little bit from Sin City, which was released a few years earlier. The movie isn't quite black and white. It does have certain colors that pop, like the Spirit's red tie, for example, and his blue eyes, amongst others. So there's a nice blending of color with a monochromatic look. Story-wise, like I said, it's a little bizarre, with the Spirit being a dead police officer injected with some kind of experimental serum by the Octopus, who happened to be a coroner trying to unlock the key to immortality. It's a strange story with death constantly calling to the Spirit, the Octopus having some ridiculous clone henchmen, some questionable costume choices by the Octopus as well, and a strange romance thrown in with the Spirit's childhood girlfriend. I don't think it's a complicated story at all. It's just a little disjointed. But I can't help but say that I did enjoy it. And I even rewatched it in preparation for this review. And actually, it was pretty entertaining. So maybe not all bad. So let's jump into the figure, which I have to say off the bat is really interesting from a design perspective, and that's in large part just due to the uniqueness of the look. In case I hadn't mentioned it, the Octopus is played by Samuel L. Jackson, and it just seemed like he was having a blast during this. And when your character hits another one with a toilet, I think you would have to have a pretty good sense of humor. And yes, that does happen early on in the movie. I'm not making it up. As for the release itself, it is based on the way the Octopus appears in the movie's final sequence, and it's pretty nicely done, including a good number of weapons, although not every one that he uses in the end. And Hot Toys did get a little sneaky with that combined monster gun you can see on the table, but I'll go more in depth with that when we get into the accessories. And of course you do get that old school stand, which for this figure I actually do think is an essential piece. So jumping into the accessories in more detail, let's start with this big quad weapon that he has, which is essentially 2 AR-style rifles with an Uzi and a shotgun all tied together. How he manages to fire all these at once? Suspension of disbelief. But the piece does look good, with removable magazines from the guns, some spare shotgun shells, and the rifles all have a foregrip attachment and flashlight at the underside. They also include scopes that have laser designators on them. The arrangement overall doesn't really make sense, but I think the idea from the movie was to make this a ridiculously over-the-top, visually gripping piece, and Hot Toys reproduced that well. Trick here, in the final sequence where the Octopus is shooting at an entire flight of Apache gunships, and yeah, that happens too. I told you it's a strange movie. But anyway, during that scene, he uses 2 of these. So if you do want to pose him with both sets, you had to buy the Spirit, which came with the second version of this gun. So smart thinking by Hot Toys to compel you to buy both figures. Next up, he has 2 quad shooter shotguns, and paintwork here looks great, and they do have functioning hinges to open and reveal the shells inside the barrels. And the dual quads make sense, 8 barrels for 8 octopus arms. So I do like the pieces a lot, and they are unique. The final set of weapons are these amazing looking silver revolvers. Detail work is great here with the nice work on the barrels and the tips of the gun. The barrels also do have some movable parts, and you can move them out of the main body of the gun. They just look impressive, and again, they match exactly what's in the movie. And they're both very stylized and maybe a little oversized, but they look incredible. Final accessory is his hat, which is done in a nice fabric to look fluffy. Nothing crazy here, looks good, although having it look great on the figure is a little bit of a chore, but nice addition to the overall look. The one thing I do think for myself is that I won't be keeping it on. My Barney Ross, for example, from the Expendables, has a permanent stain on the forehead from the beret that he wears, the beret that he wears. So I don't want to have that happen with this figure. Now, speaking of the sculpts and the heads, let's switch over to take a look at that. And I think it still holds up really well, especially for the age of this figure. It looks like Sam Jackson, including that great detail around the eyes with the octopus tentacles on the lower portions. Not sure if that was meant to be makeup or a tattoo, but it looks great. And the rest of his eye includes some purple makeup. It very much matches his appearance from that final scene in the movie. And I think the sculpt has some incredible detail here, from the wrinkles on his forehead to the detail work on his facial hair. Again, it's a sculpt that I think has aged remarkably well. Only slight issue I would have is the positioning of the eyes. They're almost set looking up a little bit, so it does impact how you pose them. But this is a great job by Hot Toys, and regardless of the movie, you can tell why something like this was so appealing to a collector like me. To think that Hot Toys was doing this level of work a long time ago, and that they look so good. As far as the rest of the figure, clothing set they picked for him from the final scene was really the way to go here. The jacket has a faux fur collar and wristbands that are also faux fur. They just look great, and they also feel soft, so it's not a heavy piece, and it actually drapes nicely on the figure. The other incredible thing about the fabric, and I didn't notice it in the movie, but the pattern essentially consists of tentacles, all purple. It's actually another thing that stands out about the figure. It's the color palette with the red, silvers, and purple. There's no missing the sky on a shelf. Now, the pants are a pleather material, and fortunately mine are still intact. When I saw those as I was unboxing, I was expecting them to just start flaking and falling apart. But I guess I got lucky, and then he does come with these massive boots that look almost armored in nature. And I do like the detail work on the buckles, which look like almost miniature skulls. Then you have the scarf and the undershirt, all a nice silky material, also really well tailored. Add to that the belt, which is a hard plastic, and you really do have a figure that from an aesthetic point really stands out. Whether or not it's your aesthetic is another question, but it definitely pops. So overall, I'm actually impressed with the figure, especially for an older release, but there are things to watch out for. And I did mention earlier that the stand is vital for this one, and that's because the figure has a lot of difficulty standing on its own. That's in large part due to the size of the boots and the inability to place the feet flat on the surface. This was before split cut boots were more of the norm. The other big thing are the sheer size of the combined guns. They're so heavy that the arms have trouble holding them up in place, and that's just with one. Now imagine trying to get in pose with both sets of weapons. I don't know that the hands are going to be able to keep the guns in position. So just something I'll have to watch out for. But looking at the figure just in general, it's such a random pickup, and I think modern day me would have 100% passed on this one, as it just doesn't fit with my collection. But looking at it now, I'm glad I have him. Generally, I'm not for selling my figures. I dabbled with that a little bit a few years ago, more due to space limitations, but in general, I like to keep most of what I buy, and I have to admit that I'm glad I didn't end up selling these because they look pretty good. And I'll say it again, as bizarre as the movie was, it did have a really great cast overall. And sure, everyone is hamming it up, but it almost feels like they had a good time making it. And Sam Jackson just plays the role so well. At least I thought so. Don't get me wrong, the logical part of me realizes this isn't a great movie at all, but I still get a kick out of it, and watching again to prepare for this review, I'm still surprised at how entertaining it was. That might, however, say more about my bad taste in movies, but still, watching it made me appreciate having this figure more. And it does show you some of the more random parts of my collection. At some point I'll unbox the Spirit himself, but I don't think visually he's as striking a figure. But this is a great pairing, and I do feel like without both, this set is a little lacking. So, one of my more interesting pickups, but not one I regret, even with the property it's based on being so well-received. Now, the next retrospective showcase you'll see is one that's going to be filled with regret, but I'm happy to say that I'm really enjoying this figure that I have now, and I think that definitely makes it a worthwhile addition to my display. Will it be shown in a prominent place? Probably not, but still, it'll be displayed. So that was a quick look at the Octopus from the Spirit and 6-scale format. Let me know your thoughts, and as always, if you're enjoying the content, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing, and we'll touch base on the next video.